I was setting up at the club field for a day of prop testing this afternoon. We have some Brodeck dope samples we want to check. But we basically have about 2 or 3 hours, so I got out here at the field real early. First thing I want to do is get a square one flight. Now, what's happened in the last 3-4 days that we have been flying, we had the days at Coxsackie, we've come across some real interesting things. Number one is this needle valve hasn't been set in 3 days. So that was one thing that I really liked, the fact that I didn't have to tack this every flight. I have to go nuts. But this is my square one. I have the pipe tucked a little bit closer into the body now. It should change the vertical CG just a tad. And of course these are minor trim adjustments. The first thing I want to do, get this fueled up and get a square one flight so I know where I am before I start any test at all. Now usually first thing in the morning, this will be a little persnippety to start, basically because the way we have it sitting in the van, probably some of the oil gets down into the engine. So what I've been doing is taking a little bit of lighter fluid, 2 or 3 drops, not a lot in the venturi, flipping it while it's upside down. It will usually bump and split that out, and usually from that point on it's pretty reasonable to get the start. That's one good tip that we found so far. And that worked, of course, years ago. Works on 60s, works on K and B 40s. The other thing is I always want to start. I've seen guys come out to the field and have a test prop on. Well, wait a minute. You don't know where it would be because every day the atmosphere is different, especially in our club environment here. The air is almost dead now. So I want to see pretty much where I am right now. Then I have 4 2 blades and a couple of other props that I might try for one flight. Basically 3 hours to do this test. And what I want to do is just get a feel. Some of the props are going to need to be up-pitched. Some are going to need to be down-pitched. But I have 4 different ones. I have a Bill Lee prop, I have a Brian Ether prop, and I have a Bowley. So I pretty much have a good sampling of what's available commercially on the market. And this, of course, is Wayne Triven's prop that has been the winner every time we've done any kind of testing with tuned pipes. It seems like Wayne's prop always wins. I don't, maybe because it's the best prop, I don't know. And one of the things we wanted to do but couldn't, we wanted to try that prop on Joe Adamusco's PA61, but the shaft on a 61 is a bigger diameter. I didn't want to remount the prop, so possibly at some future time he'll just get a prop from Wayne if he can, or get the equivalent thing in a bowl. Again, we're in an experimental mode. We're not in a mode of where we have everything set in stone. And what I'd like to do is use the remainder of the season, the remainder of my time, to try to get this whole package as highly developed as I can. Then if anybody wants to share that information, we're perfectly willing to share it. One of the things that's plagued other programs is the fact that you go and you need some information and it's difficult to get information, or the information you get may be conflicting. One guy will tell you turn the pitch up, one guy will say turn it down, one guy will say use this prop, use that prop. When you go to the nats, you see just how each person fine-tunes his setup. Paul Walker's is very, very specialized for his needs. Ted and David basically have the same package. Billy Roach has his fine-tuned with a Brian Ether prop. The prop, aside from the motor itself, is the most significant part of the whole package. And so we'll spend the rest of this day, and we'll try to get some video of flights, even though we're not trying to run Nats winning stunt flights. And the reason I say that is I'm feeling for weak spots, places where there's not as much tension as I would like, places where it'll go soft. So I really don't, in that mode, I don't try to get real low exciting bottoms or try to really keep 45 even. I just try to get representative flights. Now if you remember, one of the things we had in the very beginning was we didn't have the tank vented exactly the way it should be. This, by the way, is an absolutely stock, right out of the box, all tube forward taffender tank. There's nothing trick about it. It isn't one of the baffled, tricky ones that you get one of a kind. The tank seems to be just about the right size. In fact, every flight we've had, virtually every flight, has been the pattern in 10 to 15 laps. I don't think I've ever had more than 15 or less than 10, and that's about as close as I could get it if I spent a year working on it. But again, it would be interesting. One of the things George had told me is this motor, being different than a Super Tiger 60, needed to be wet when it started.
Now normally, when it's a totally first start of the day, you're a little hesitant to flip the prop. You know there's going to be oil in by the glow plug. And it's bumping already now. I haven't even primed it, so it's going to run the prime out the first time. In fact, why even fool around? I'm going to try to get George to make me a Venturi that's about 1/4 of an inch longer for this. 5 or 6 chokes has been doing it. Get it to bump.
now, the first flights always tell us how the air is, and the air is shifting and moving, and in the time that we've spent setting up here, it's already gone from dead calm to where it's in a different spot for each maneuver. So I don't know how much more video we'll get, but I always want to get that first flight, that square one. And that was kind of a representative run of what we experienced with the last 3.25 gallons of fuel. We're coming up on 4 gallons of fuel here. We still have a little tendency to be overly rich on the ground. I don't know if that's going to... Sometimes just having a leaner setting makes that go away, but again, that's one of the little idiosyncrasies of the motor we're going to be working on. I'm really hoping I can get a longer venturi from George, 1/4 inch longer, I think, to do it, just so I can choke it a lot easier, clearing the cowling. But the starting problems are almost totally gone. And right now, the way the motor is running, I'm trying to do the minimum amount of fiddling with the needle and just see how long up through the day. And what's happened is 2 or 3 days in a row, it's had no change at all. Just go right into the day and see how this is, as the day warms up, we're going to get about another 2 hours of seeing in the temperature change if the needle's going to need to be reset.
since the last time we recorded, air is gone. It's for all purposes now too shifty to be doing full stun patterns, but I do want to get at least one run on this. I have two ether props here, one Boley. And this was the Bill Lee prop. It's highly undercambered. I have it marked already. I can see I've repitched this once already. And I only really concern myself with the last inch of the prop. I don't spend my whole life worrying about what goes on in there. This should be real similar, and what would be nice is this would give me a backup prop if it was real close to Wayne's prop. Let me try this one flight before we abandon ship here. Now again, I always get to a point in the day where I really wish we could keep doing full stun patterns, but normally people right now would be packing up and going home. If you take a real close look at that last flight, you can see the airhead shifted halfway through the flight. I was just trying to fly through it. But it still doesn't deter prop testing. With some kind of motor testing, things that you want to test, you really always will be able to do that. Because you can feel if it gets slower or faster. Now this is let's just get a comparison right now. Bill Lee's prop is about a 1/16 of an inch less diameter. And I'm looking at the pitch. It looks like, it looks real close. Let's see if they have it shimmed right. Anyway, what's important here is to make sure that, for instance, if we nick a prop on takeoff at a contest or whatever, we certainly want to have a backup prop, and I really hope Wayne is going to be able to supply us even with some rough props that need to be hand finished since he has the mold for these. Or if he would, to allow me to mold them, give me the okay that it's okay to mold them myself. I'll make my own mold. Again, up to this point, these two props look real close. The ether props look like they have a little too much pitch. But usually what I'd like to do is try them anyway. You just never know. And there's no substitute for just flying. Again, the thing with all prop testing that I'm always trying to is just to get a comparison. And the air, even in unflyable air like it is now, or I don't know what you would call this air, what's always real nice to be able to do is just say to yourself, in the case, let's pretend you have three props. This prop is a little bit overpitched, one is just about right, one is a little underpitched. Usually on a runway, you can use the underpitched prop. And in this kind of air where you're in a confined space, you usually want to have a prop that's as big in diameter as the engine will turn, and certainly running it at full power, getting as much power and thrust and drive out of it as you can. Where on a runway, you're always looking for the prop to act as a brake, and usually the minimum would be 3 props, at least I would think. In the case of a 60, that usually equates to 14.5 rev-ups cut down. But with pipe engines, usually the carbon is a better choice. Now this is Bill Lee's prop. I don't know what the air is going to try it anyway. I want to see how it's going to run with the needle not changed. With the needle set exactly like it is for Wayne's prop. This is try. This is Bill Lee's prop.
test flight, you can see how disgusting the air is here, and it's moving and shaking, and we're going to pretty much put an end to this session right now, because it does get dangerous to fly the plane. But we do know one thing: Billy's prop needs a bit more pitch to be equal to the one that's the number one, and so we're fine-tuning it. What I'll do when I go home today, take Bill's prop, but just a tad more pitching, just a tad more. Now this would be a fine runway prop just the way it is, but keep in mind what the air is like here, and it is fishbowling and going all over the place. And I'm going to email George and see if I can get a longer venturi. That'll make starting and choking and everything just a bit more easy. And by the way, one of the things would be worth having, since he's going to make a longer venturi, I'll have him make a 200 venturi. So we'll have a big one and a small one, and that'll be another thing we can do our fine-tuning with. But basically, the air is gone, and we're gone.
Doesn't take long here for this to go, but anyway, we did get about a half a session on, and a half is better than nothing. And while we have a time, while nobody's here at the field running motors and things, we can really get a feel for the sound of the motor and where the brake is, and et cetera, et cetera. But now we'll see you back at the house. Time to feed the fish, time to paint the nobler. As part of our ongoing Rodak test program, we did a repair. How old is the repair on this now? That paint is a week or two old, right? It's more than that even. Okay. And Ken's been putting on. Now this is Rodak clear. PSI. Whenever you do a repair, what you want to do is start on the part. You want to get a blend, and each time you put a coat on, you're moving it's called a soft edge. If you put tape, you'll always see the tape line. So each time he's putting a coat on, we're moving the tinfoil out away from the fillet just a little bit. And I'm guessing if you put 6, 7 coats on here, you'll be fine. You know, don't just do one coat. It's better to put a lot of thin coats and let it dry between coats. The overspray will come right off with grams. And get extra on the edges. You know, the leading and trailing edges, that's the part where you're going to buff through right away. By the way, Ken has in stock now the kits. I don't know what have you called this thing? The arrow holder or the
Arrow cradle.
Arrow cradle. They're in stock.
Immediate delivery.
Immediate delivery. He comes right to your house and puts your plane in it and paints it for you for free. Now that's the arrow cradle I want. All right, let that dry in between coats. Okay, you brushed one coat.
Yeah.
Full strength now, no thinner.
No, it was 50-50.
Oh, 50-50. Okay, one coat. And just defuzzed it, and then you sprayed the second coat of clear?
Yeah.
That looks like it's got enough on it.
I think they do. I only use light soap man.
Well, we've been doing a lot of little testing stuff to make sure that this dope is as good as it possibly can be. One of the things we did was a viscosity test for the black, and I wanted to know, obviously black covers well, but I wanted to know if it was just going to go right over railroad with nothing underneath it. In this case, a prop. A lot of people paint black props. I'm one of them that does. Just did a little test. I'll leave the other side for the next time we have a different coloring again, but so far, this paint has really been bulletproof. It's really been doing well. It'll be nice to see. This will be the first plane that we have with a whole plane, every part on it. Well, there goes your tail again. Watch your tail. The wind is starting to blow here.
Yeah.
This will be the first one other than the Nobler that has Rodak dope out in the rear wheel. Always the best on a job like this. Just every time you get to the point where you can touch it, You're not leaving a fingerprint in, put another light coat. Don't try to put on a whole gallon at one time. It's better to have 4 or 5, even 10 light coats than one big thick druid coat. Props always make a good test bed. In this case, because it's black, you just can scuff up the varnish finish on it. Get it smooth, and of course balance the wood part of it before you paint. Then you only really have to rebalance the paint once the paint is gassed out a couple of days. Now this is the Blodak black that we got for the viscosity test. That looks like it's covering.
Going on real nice.
Yeah, and this is right out of the can now. This is adding nothing. This is out of the can. It even smells nice. I love that smell. Always get the edges extra when it's a prop, you know, that's where it's going to take the most beating. Well, from the look of the flag, it's been moving around for the last 5 minutes while I've been having my coffee. There's no, again, the same thing that cut short our test session yesterday. But I will try to get as much, well, get any time testing these props. I really want to get some time with the Bill Lee prop, and I have the 2 Brian Ether props, so let's see what we can get done today. As I'm unloading the equipment, and the wind is shifting 180 degrees here, but what I try to do every day, I try to get set up, get that old square one, get a flight with square one. The reason for that is I want to know where I'm starting this test session. And in this case, we left off yesterday with Bill Lee's prop on a plane, and not having had any flights to kind of play with the needle. It seems like it's just a little bit under-pitched relative to Wayne's prop, and I don't know that I want to even pitch it up yet. The reason being, this would probably be a great runway prop if we go up to the nest meet. I don't know if we're going to be able to make it this year. This would probably be a great nest prop. It's kind of a little weak for the circle burner field. This kind of air in a bowl of trees like this, usually you need a little more pitch and a lot more diameter than that on the runway. Now, just a couple of the things that have given me food for thought. Number one is, I hate to have any piece of equipment, from a pipe, a motor, to a whatever. I hate to have a piece of equipment that's the only one I have. And in this case, this is, at least up till now, this is the only prop I have. I have 1 Bill Lee prop, and 1 Wayne prop, and 2 Brian Ether props that are really appropriate for this motor. Not counting the 5 blades and 3 blades and things that I could be working with further on down the road. But one of the things, and I want to emphasize again, if you just take 1 prop, yeah, and you'll only have it right, really, or keyed in for 1 condition. The problem is our local contest circuit. See these geese coming overhead. Listen to this. Go on, go back to Canada. Go to Texas. Keep George country. Boy, if they fly over when you're doing a wing over, it can ruin your about 1,000. It can ruin your whole day. But if you only have 1 prop, the problem is you nick the prop, it's the end of your day, or contest or whatever. So maybe what I should be really emphasizing here is I'd like to get this prop and Wayne's prop to be good under these conditions. We'll probably fly the rest of the year out on these conditions before we can get props and be worrying about Nat's one-way props. But you get a prop to work on this field, you have really accomplished it. This prop yesterday looked like it was just a little bit. Not a whole lot. This is going to work. Now, if you look at that last flight, one of the things you'll notice is we've been getting hit with crazy air. So I'm being ultra cautious about the bottoms, not trying to force bottoms here. Now, a couple of good things. When nobody is at the field like this except myself, you can really hear the motor run. You can hear where it may need to go a little faster, a little slower. One of the things this prop does that Wayne's prop doesn't do, this prop unloads the motor seemingly a little bit more. It sounds like it's unloading a couple extra 100 RPM at certain places in the pattern. I don't know if that's correct or not. I have no way of checking it, but it puts a little bit less of a load on the motor. But one of the things that's, again, stayed the same, and it's a real plus, is I haven't been fiddling a lot with this needle. And if I can go from prop to prop, day to day, with a minimum amount of fiddling, once this is dialed in, and this is basically the setup that George sent except for the prop, then that's really something the average person can put in the bank. Now, trying to get the last 2 or 3% of performance, and we're really just getting 1/10 of a percent or 1% here, having backup setups and things like that. Yeah, well, the average guy isn't going to have the time or the energy or the inclination to do that, except for the top level guys that are really looking to push that envelope down the limit a little bit more. So while we have a little bit of air that's almost flyable, and before somebody else comes to the field and we can't hear motor runs, just try to get a couple more flights on this billowy prop before we start changing things. close at that last flight. And this is very, very fine tuning. What you're going to see is on the outside maneuvers, I have my little notepad, which I always have. On the outside maneuvers, with the Bill Lee prop, it's letting the motor unload even more. And when it unloads a little more on outsides. Go back and look at the outside loops if you can even hear it, because nobody else is flying at the field. So what I want to make a note, and this is probably a shim of a 32nd of an inch or something like that. Shim tank for richer outside. Now that would mean a shim has to go between the tank and the motor. Now it may seem, I don't want to give the misimpression like, oh, it's a problem, oh geez, because I know there's people out there, oh geez, he's got problems shimming a tank. No, what I'm trying to do is get the outside and the inside to be as close as possible. Now a lot of times with a Schnurley motor you can't get the outside exactly the same, but you try to get it as close as possible. But one of the things, if you have a choice, the two choices are, in my feeling, if you can't get the motor to run exactly the same on both sides, if it's a little off, let it be a little faster outside, because it gives you tension at the top of the hourglass, and that's why I was doing hourglasses at the end of the pattern. The outside part of the outside square 8, the outside leg, but you never want to have is that it's faster inside. That's the combination that's really difficult to live with. So I'm not going to, obviously this is stuff that when I'm back to shop and I have to take the plane apart for some other reason or just to do maintenance, I'll put that tank shim in. But I'm not going to do it at the field and lose an hour of flying, especially, it looks like the air, if anything, isn't getting any worse. You'll see every once in a while a plane will come around and it'll just, well, there's some funny air here. But again, the Bill Lee, now I'm at the end of what I'm going to be doing with this prop. This prop is certainly you could have either Wayne's prop or Bill Lee's prop. Now the problem with Wayne's prop, I don't think Wayne is interested in commercially selling hundreds of props, but Bill Lee is. So if we can get Bill Lee's prop to work exactly right, what I'd be willing to do if he's interested is send him the prop, make sure it's exactly the way he's molded them, so he can then send them to George in that configuration. And I don't know who's making George's props now, somebody overseas, but they also, by sharing the information, I personally don't care when I make a prop or mold a prop or a pipe ring. If anybody copies it, God bless them. But there are some people that feel like it's their own trick thing. Now I wouldn't dare copy Wayne's prop. I know he's a speed flyer and he has a lot of little tricks. All these props are highly undercambered too, by the way. But Bill Lee, being he's selling commercial props, might want to sell this as an optional prop for the Jett 50. I don't know, and I will mention that to George the next time I email him. But again, these are all the little things. Always have one of these little post-it notes. Because as I go through the day, do this, do this, do this. Well, at the end of the day, when you're I'm going to be 53 Saturday. When you get, I don't think, maybe it's even when you're young, you get to a point where you get home and you say, what do I want to do? Shim it up, shim it down, pitch it up. There's days I go home and I have brain melt. Maybe all days, in fact. But by writing it down, this is your best investment against having that you forget to do something, or that each day, what my goal is each day to come to the field and have it just a little bit in finer tune than the day before. And we're so close to start with that a lot of this is really pointless. But there's another side to it. For me, I count my hour or two, or sometimes I even get 3 hours every morning of flying. I count this as exercise. And when I go home, I'm usually tired. Well, you know, that's good exercise. And when you're 53, you need all the exercise you can get. And this is, it sounds a little hokey, but as soon as the flying season stops, I usually put on about 8-10 pounds right away. So while I'm lean and mean, yeah, lean and mean, right, like an elephant. Now what'll happen a lot of times, and I've done this many times, whether it's a pipe or a 60 or a 40 or what'll happen when you have a prop that puts a tremendous load on the engine, and I think Wayne's prop is really maxed out as far as loading the engine. What it does, it kind of masks over some of these other problems like a tank shim or something that may be a little minor, insignificant, not a problem, but something you want to deal with. Now, from looking at all these props, yeah, I can see that even Brian Ether's prop is really undercambered very well. They've gotten this down to a science, and I remember, boy, Wayne's prop is undercambered like you can't believe it. This is the thinnest prop I've ever seen. This other one, this is a Brian Ether. This is really highly undercambered too.
And this one, I don't even know if we can use this. The diameter is cut way down on this. This is 11 and a half. I don't want to use that. Not right now. I'll give it a couple of shots. But what happens as you let a motor unload in the two-cycle part of the maneuver, when it goes into it and it gets that part where it unloads, if it's under prop, it'll unload like a rocket ship. Well, there's a balance here. The balance is you'd like to have, at least in the conditions we fly under, the biggest diameter possible to get through this crazy air. Well, when you get out on a runway, you don't need the biggest diameter. Then you want to go for a little less pitch, a little less diameter, something that'll act more like a brake. On this field, you never need a brake. What you need is a helicopter here. But anyway, just so I can get as much of the information onto the video as possible, one of the things now, I have one more of these props to try, so I may as well try this Brian Ether guy here. I just want to look at him real close. With my eye, it's looking like he has just a little less pitch and exactly the same diameter. So it'll be worth giving this one try, and of course, I'll mark this up. Now, Brian Ether, usually, when I used to work with Brian Ether, and we had years ago made some test props, I had sent them back to him. He had remolded them. I don't remember, and that was around 91 when I was doing pipes all the time. One of the things that Brian was real good at was identifying. He was really, really fussy about getting the blades exactly to what he had written, 4 1/8 and 4 1/4 and everything. I'm really a little less fussy than that. I really only get myself crazy about that last inch of pitch, and I think when we get back to the shop, I'll go through again how I make up my little wood block with an angle on the end. And I really only concern myself with that last little inch of pitch. That's the one that does all the work. And if you get that right, the rest of it is, yeah, significant, but it's not going to make you crazy. But if you get the last inch wrong, oh man, you either have no tension up top or whatever. And by the way, anybody and one of the things I can do for people now, if you have a Jett 50 and you are not happy with the prop, I can share this information, I can share the video, or you can just point blank send me the prop and I'll pitch it exactly the way mine is. I'll test fly it, I'll videotape the test flight and send it back to you. Now, that's one of the things I can do, and one of the things we did years ago that was real helpful to a lot of people. When we had the Tiger 60s with the pipes, if you look at the old stuff, the old tapes, the real old tapes, one of the things I liked was Brian Ether had made a big giant 3-blade, I think it was 12 1/2, that really was a windmill. And the only problem with the prop was you really had to get it de-pitched at the tip. You couldn't leave that pitch in a way, because they were elliptical tips, they were very efficient. And if you had just even a little bit too much pitch at the tip, they would tend to run away. Well, once that pitch was taken out, those props became absolute tractors. In fact, I remember somebody, Bill Rich, wrote on the side of his plane, he was using a carbon prop, tractor stunt, and he spelt it wrong. But Bill will never forget that. That was absolutely priceless, and we have it on video even. Anyway, on with the test. Brian Ether prop next. I forgot to do, because these really aren't my props, I forgot to etch the face of the prop where it's going to be touching the washer. I'm just doing this with the end of an Allen wrench, put some scratches in it. I don't like that smooth. Even a couple of scratches is better than nothing. It looks like these were scratched at one time and it just point blank wore off. But even a couple of scratches like that will go a long way toward not having to over tighten the nut. And you notice another thing, anytime I use carbon props, I use an automotive wrench. I don't use one of those little silly 4-ways. I remember seeing Frank McMillan at the Nats having a lot of trouble with the prop loosening up, and I kept thinking, boy, if that motor bumps and that prop goes flying off, that's like one of those ninja things that you, especially a 3-blade, you can't even duck. So I'm real careful, especially when I'm at the field alone like this. I don't want to have a prop. Jimmy Casal had props fly off and hit people and chew up airplanes. This is cheap insurance. If we were back at the shop, I could easily do this. This, by the way, is something that's good to do no matter what you do. This is a tip worth its weight in gold. But again, the good thing about being this is from the days of motorcycle mechanics, you got to be able to do this stuff at the field. You always have to have some kind of a backup system that works at the field. And I would love to come home from this day with 2 or 3 props that I know I can put on a plane. Basically, the needle valve in this engine, you probably could run it without a needle valve. It's got such a wide power band that If you just touch it in or touch it out, all you're gaining is 100 RPM either way. It just basically settles in. Even if you launch it rich, it settles in at that RPM that it seems happy at. It is by far, by big far, the friendliest user-friendly pipe motor I have ever seen. It is friendlier on a pipe than a Tiger 60 is. Even a Tiger 60 was a little bit of a needle queen. You had to be needling it and playing with it. And now, it's always nice if when you're doing prop testing, you can have the same conditions all day. What you'll notice here is the first flight of the day, usually we just try to check out the air. Second and third flight, you might want to look around if you can keep the pattern out. I'm flying right into the wind right now in these flights because if I don't, I can't really record flights. And then I can't go home. What I do every day when I go home and do my mail and stuff, I let the TV play so I can listen to the sound. Let's get an idea from Bill Lee's prop. This is wider blades, an 1/8 inch more diameter, and a little less undercamber. So this should be more of a tractor. It should actually, if I don't touch the needle, it should increase the speed some. Assuming you get to a point though where the prop is overloading the engine, and if you hear it sagging in maneuvers, then you better do either a deep pitch. First choice is to deep pitch at this field anyway. And if you don't deep pitch, at least trim an 1/8 inch off the blade tips and rebalance. But we'll do all that back to shop. What we're hoping to accomplish is to get a little gauge made that no matter what prop we use, we'll be able to put it on that gauge, get the pitch, and know that that pitch is going to run in the RPM and load range that we're going to be comfortable. And this engine feels like it's got a real wide power range. It feels like we could probably run this like you run a VMAX like Paul Walker does real fast, or you could slow it way down, or you could run it like Frank Williams does where it's really on the pipe all the time. You have a lot of choices, and it's a nice, actually I'm having a lot of fun doing this stuff. The key will be to see if I can use the same needle setting, and that pretty much is going to tell me that the load on the motor will be real close. The air hasn't gotten any better or worse. So if the temperature hasn't changed much, and the air hasn't changed much, and I can just switch props without having to re-needle or go through all that harassment, and it stays in the power range that I want to use. Now what this prop, because it has a little more diameter, this one might mask over that little tuning thing of having a plane go leaner on the outside loops than on the inside. Again, that's something a lot of people, if you go look at the video at a Nats, for instance, you can see almost everybody that's using this type of a setup, when they go into the outside loops, the motor will stay dead lean. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some people prefer to shim them that way, and some people really have it. And I think the one I'd want to strive for is the run that Paul Walker has, which just seems to be about as even and equal and everything as any of them. And I like to play his flight over and over and just listen to the motor.
Now, even though on that last flight, the plane flies off screen, the air shifted about 4 times in the middle of a flight, and it was actually getting dangerous to do some of the maneuvers. One of the things that's real significant is now without a re-needling, putting this prop on the engine, you can see how it's put the engine at parts of the pattern if you listen real close, and that's why I didn't want to throw that flight away. You can hear the motor sagging. You can hear that this prop is loading the motor a lot more than the other two. Even though it's only 1/8 of an inch more diameter, you would think at 1/8 of an inch more diameter it would be almost nothing. Wrong. That's about a tremendous increase in load on an engine. So what I'm going to do is take this prop off, take this home before I go any further and get the last prop on and go just take 1/8 of an inch off the blades. Because again, the thing is I want all these props to have the same needle setting. I don't want to have props that every time I change a prop I have to re-needle a motor 40 times. That's what I'm trying to have. And I've got what I hope is a good runway prop and one that is going to be a killer in this kind of air. And I have one more to test.
Boy, the air is just unbelievably bad today.
Now, one of the things I ran into here, running the big Brian Ether prop, it has a lot less undercamber than Wayne's prop or Bill Lee's prop. Now, one of the things the undercamber does, it unloads the motor more, of course. But one of the other things, too, is when I picked up both props, one in each hand, I can feel Brian Ether's prop is the heaviest of the three that are working real well. And what it is, I was getting a little bit of this action on the outside maneuver, so being this plane has a Ray rudder, it's real easy to counteract for that. Usually under about 12 inches, you don't even need to bother with it. But I did take one click in on this, took another flight, the whole phenomenon just disappeared. So now when I put back the lighter props, I may have to go back to that setting. But I'd like to know ahead of time, the idea being I want to know ahead of time that using this prop, I need one click of Ray rudder, and that's one of the things that you want to do at the field. Obviously not the day you get to the Nats. You get to the Nats, you can never get any real practice in anyway. You never get any back-to-back flights unless you're there at 3 in the morning. So one more to go. Now this one is really undercambered. This is down under 12 inches of diameter, so I don't know how either strong or weak it's going to be, but being we have a little time left here today before we have to go off to work, we'll give that one. And this one I'm not even going to bother with today. This one has been cut down way too much. Maybe just one throwaway flight just to see just how that motor performs. This is 11.5 inches. That doesn't seem like nearly enough diameter, at least to pull this plane.
It's basically getting real hot right now. In fact, I'm ready to expect before the day is over, before this session is over, that I'm going to have to go in on a needle a little bit. I've been trying to see just how wide that range is, and it is extremely wide. It is unbelievably wide. Now, I'm really hoping that soon I'll have the longer venturi. It'll make the motor easier to choke. That's a real nuisance with this cowling setup. But of course, if you were building a plane right from the get-go, you would build it with all the right holes and the right things in place already. It seems like we've got a little bit of a handle on the starting characteristics, and this is what comes from having a few gallons of fuel through the engine. Next time we pull this apart, we'll shim the tank, and by the end of the day, or maybe even tomorrow, we'll get a prop gauge made, and I'll make that on video, so that we know the RPM range this engine is real happy, and we should know that by now, by heart. But just to see that we can get other props pitched without a lot of testing. Oh, the day is getting tiring. It's so hot out here.
Now, this is the kind of stuff that makes you crazy. In looking through the prop box, I was looking for the 5-bladed prop. I wanted to take the last flight of the day, or what I'll call the waster flight, just for a fun flight to see what the prop load on the 5-blade is. We had made one of these up for John DeTavio for his tune pipe thing, and he never really used it because he only had one, and we didn't have any spares D-pitch down to this pitch range. But while looking through this box, I found a loose Bill Lee prop, an extra one that I had bought at the Nats that wasn't even balanced, so I have one extra one now in my collection. So what I did, I balanced it and cut this one down to 12 inches. So I have one now that's 12 and a half, one that's 11 and a half, and one that's 12. I have 3 sizes of Bill Lee prop. All 3 of them are pitched almost exactly the same. It's just a question of leaning on the motor a little more for the big one. And they're real close to being very usable right out there. I haven't pitched them up or down. I don't think so. But anyway, we have 3 choices now of Bill Lee prop where we only had 2 before. And this is what you wind up with somewhere down the road. And I have my little notes made. The little one I want to take some pitch out of. And you can pretty much, once I make a gauge, I can get these all equalized. So I'm working in the right RPM range. I don't have some that the plane's going to be going 4.8 and some the plane will be going 6.0. And we'll do that back at the shop. Have it when you hear Wendy say, be organized, keep track of everything. Here, I had a prop in the box loose, and I'm sure what happened is somebody borrowed it, put it on a plane, was going to use it, did use it, and then just, without even telling me, just stuffed it back in the box. Because, you know, I couldn't have done that. You know, that would be, and even if I did it, I wouldn't admit it. Anyway, we do loan a lot of props out. We get some of them back, amazingly enough. We got some 3 blades of it. What's happening now? We're closing in on this last gallon of fuel here. This is going to be what I hope is going to be the 4th gallon that's through the motor. And then I want to go back and redo the 3-blade test, because by then, now this motor is really nice and free and loose and starting right away. It really does take a few gallons of fuel for these to come up to where they're really making the maximum power. Now I had de-pitched 2 of these actually. These are like razor blades, by the way. I had de-pitched 2 of these for John DeTavio years ago. I'm trying to figure out, see, I never marked them. I guess we were going back and forth with me. This is the one. This is one of them. Anyway, this was really an adventure making these. If you think this is easy to make, hey, buy yourself a couple gallons of resin and touring resin and stuff and go make them. They're difficult. Anyway, this ought to be fun. It's the end of the day. I'm hot and sweaty, and basically I can get a couple flights on these, maybe 1 or 2 flights, just see if they're even in the ballpark. Now, unfortunately, I didn't bring the 5-blade spinner, so I'm going to have to fly this. Well, but this will give me a little indication, just give me a little idea of where the prop load is and where the pitch is on these. And we are at the end of the day. Boy, I am really overheated. I think I'm in Texas. It may really seem at times that you're really spinning your wheels and you're going back and forth, but boy, I'll tell you, what I found is when you get it right, when you have the RPM matched to the prop, matched to the load of the engine load and the drag of the plane, when all of those factors come together, you have really got one super performing plane. And it's certainly not something, unless you're extremely lucky, that you're just going to hit on the first try. It takes a little experiment. This is how you get your exercise anyway. Burn up some of that pizza. I really didn't want to run that 3-blade until I get the full 4 gallons through, so maybe we're not going to get to do that today. Maybe that'll be a tomorrow project. last thing in today's session. I'm going to get one flight on this. We just got about a half a gallon to go. One flight I'll put on this just to get some idea. Now George has suggested that this may need to get cut down to 11 3/4, and we'd like to do that in the shop, because if it isn't pulling it now, if it's overloading the engine now, it's really pointless. I'll just take 1/8 of an inch off for the blades back at the shop.
Hey, just remember how significant a thing it is not to overload the engine. It's very easy, especially when an engine is new to. You start putting bigger and bigger propellers on, and you usually get some performance gain, like overhead line tension or something that you really like. You don't want to ever hear the motor sagging in maneuvers. When it goes into the 2-cycle part of the maneuver, it had better gain RPM and not lose it. And it's that sagging sound that, like when you're going up a hill in a car in 5th gear or 4th gear, and it just dies on you. It's that sound that you want to avoid. That's what usually results in very, very disappointing. I ought to do it this way. This was working before. In real disappointing motor runs, and obviously it does nothing for engine life either, because you're putting a tremendous thermal load on the engine when you do that. It's better it should be a little bit smaller than a little bit too big.
Oh, what a treat. Come home from a hot, long day of flying. Safe in the knowledge that we've accomplished something, but we're not sure what. And just sit by the waterfall here and have a nice cup of coffee and look at my lily. Now that's only one of about 4 or 5 lilies that's been blooming all year. Town's pride. Just some of the flowers from Karen's garden, boy. What a warm summer we've had. Everything's growing in the garden. And boy, there was nothing like the comfort of home after a day, a sweaty, long, hot day. Good old 93 Elliott.
Okay, to make up a little pitch gauge, of course I'm working off my notes. I took notes on what I want to do to all these props and things. I want to find a piece of motor mount, but obviously we're not going to, you could kill somebody with this. I want to find a piece of motor mount that is nice and straight. This one here looks like a good candidate for a gauge. And I want to mark it carefully with all the parts, all the props that I have. Let me get a T-square. Now anybody that's not done it this way, this is not like when you have a pitch gauge and you want to check every station on a prop. To me that's unnecessary for what we're doing, because all we want to know in this case is, do we want to go a little faster or a little slower? It's like shoes. I don't need to know what size it is. I just need to know if it's too big or too small. So what I want to do is take one of the props that I know has a pitch that's working very well, and in this case we know that the 2 or 3 of these are really fine. I want to mark it up so that I'm roughly 1 inch from the end, and that would be roughly 1 inch. If it's 1 1/4 inches, nothing bad is going to happen. Roughly 1 inch from this side. And I'll make one side of this gauge for the 12.5 inch, and these are the 12.5s. Reverse it, and I'll do the other one for the 11.5s. These are the 11.5s, and we'll be able to interpolate in between, get it about 1 inch off. Again, this is just a rough number. Give myself a little thought and go over to the drill press and drill 2/4 inch holes in the wood. Imagine there's some real good counterpoint to what I'm doing, but I know that this has worked for me, and the nice part about this, it's really a budget thing. It's really no money at all. So to make this little gauge up takes you 5 minutes, and all this gauge is really is going to act as our square one. Now, it could be that when we open up the Venturi, we'll make some other motor change. We're going to change the RPM range a slight amount. But right now, this is a ballpark number for the stock engine. And actually, the stock engine is so close to being right, I can't picture a whole lot anybody would want to do to it. I have this. I need a bolt. All you need is a 1/4-inch carriage bolt. Actually, any kind of bolt. It doesn't even matter. It's really low. It's low-key, low budget, and it works a lot better than you think it would. Now, the first thing I want to do is take one of our square one props that we know is real close to being what we want. I can use either side. I marked it because I have these gauges for all the motors and all the different props. I want to drop that in. If I was doing this permanently, I would just put a nut on that. It wouldn't really matter. But I want to get a gauge for this angle. Let me try to get this on a close-up. It's this angle here that we're going to try to simulate with a piece of plywood. We're going to try to catch the front and the back, especially on an undercambered prop like this. You can see this prop has helical pitch. Well, it's going to be different at every station. But what we really want for our reference is to catch it right at the end. 1 inch, and I just use 1 inch, maybe 1 1/4 would be even more accurate. 1 inch from the end usually gives me, when I make a little change to the pitch, that usually gives me a very dramatic change. When I've tried to do the whole blade at one time, it just seems like it's too hard to hit it. It's like taking big giant amounts out. I want to make a fine pitch change. I want to just de-pitch this ever so little. But I know this one is close to being right, so I'm going to accurately put this piece on. Then I'm going to take the other two, I don't know where they are, and get all of those pitches to line up with this one, so that in effect, all of the props will have the square one pitch. And then, of course, it's back to the field for another test day. So you can use any type of plywood. I just use a scrap. Another thing, I don't spend a lot of time or a lot of energy trying to make fancy things that don't have to be fancy. What I try to do is spend a tremendous amount of time getting little things, little details right, so that all the details add up, like handle settings and things like that I'd spend infinite amounts of time on. Something like this, if you took a pitch gauge, you could spend a whole day pitching one prop. This will get you in the ballpark in 10 minutes. I just wanted to get out. Whenever I do this kind of work, I try to get all my old tooling out. Now, this is the one for trimming prop diameters. You want to have that on hand for doing the checks. You can see I made gauges for the 5 blades. Gauges, in fact, I'll use this little short bolt. This will save me a little bit of aggravation, since we won't be doing 60 props here. And I've marked on some of them. I had a 4-blade that was running at 12,000 RPM. Well, we're not going to run that one today. And I marked, well, this one, 9,500 for ST60, 12 and 13 inches. We're not going to be doing 60 props today. 4-blade Seafire and Spitfire gauges. But each one has that little piece with that little angle set into it. Now, what I want to do for this is what makes this very, here we got another one, another 5-blade gauge. Anyway, we have plenty of them. They're real quick to make. What I want to do is take the prop that we know has the good square one number on it. Run a real inexpensive carriage bolt, doesn't matter. You can put pliers on it, but you need to confine it to get it real accurate. Okay, now when we set this piece in place, we can lay it, and you can see how much undercamber there is on this prop. And setting this up is really, if you want to be a machinist, you can make all the angles 90 and you can make them as fancy as can be. I don't think you really need to do anything that exotic. This now sets you at square one. And to make a fine change, you can just take a sanding block and just kiss it. Okay, so now once I take this bolt off, now the first thing I can check is that both of the blades are equal. I can loosen that up, rotate to the other blade, and let's see, this is a Brian Ether prop. Blades are exactly equal. And you can see the little bit of undercamber in there. It's a little harder to do an undercamber prop because you want to kiss the front and back. You can't maintain that fluted surface on the bottom.
Put an extra bead of CA on here.
Just so I'm carrying it around the toolbox, I don't tend to break it. And it's always good to have a colored ink marker to mark the surface just so it's easier to see when you look at it from far away. Especially if your eyes are bad.
And I'm putting in one of Bill Lee's props. This is one of the full-size ones. And the first thing I can see from looking at it is Bill Lee's prop has just a little more pitch. The leading edge is up, the back edge is touching. So I know I can de-pitch this. Let me check the other blade. Just a little bit. Just a slight amount, probably the thickness of an IBM card. But that's a significant amount. I wanted to see if you could see this on the macro lens. You could see that the back blade is touching. I don't know how accurate, but the front isn't touching. So that's the amount. When we heat the prop and bend it, we want to bend it that amount. So in effect, we'll put the pitch from the square one prop right into Bill Lee's prop. Sometimes the easiest way to see it is to hold it up to the light this way. I don't know if we're going to be able to get this where you can see it accurately, but you're looking for either the front to be high or the back. Either way, and of course then to get both blades equal. And with this simple tool, and no money at all, in a matter of 5-10 minutes, you can get all the props with the relative pitch. You know, it's like a shoe size. If you had a size 10 shoe and you knew that's the size that fit, then what you can do is go to the store and try all the shoes on that fit and make them all size 10. And each one then will have just a little bit different prop load, but you can see here, you can see in this angle a little bit better. The front edge is just up just a little bit. And these props have a memory. If you're out on a hot day, a lot of times they'll kind of ease back to their original pitch. But if you have the gauge with you and you see the plane speed up at the field, all of a sudden it's going faster than you normally would expect it, especially if it's a cool day. You look at it and say, oh, put it on the gauge, and you can tell right away, and you just go back. Another way, if you want to do this at the field, is carry a thermos of coffee with you. Dip this much of the prop in coffee and use a mitten, and you can bend it right back at the field. I've done that. Boiling water or coffee is fine. Because this resin actually gets soft at about 165 degrees. And you can see this one. This is the other prop we have. You can see how high that leading edge is. So what we're looking to do is just get all these pitches identical. And we'll just replicate the same thing on the other side. So we have one we can use for the 12.5-inch props, one for the 11.5, and then we'll probably get another hole in here when we get some that are 12 inches. But that's what that gauge is showing you. And with that gauge, we really can do a lot of fine-tuning, no money at all.
See, the method I like, you can use the hot water method. I think this works. It gives me a little more control. I use an oven mitt. You can use anything that protects your hand. Remember, this resin softens at 165 degrees, so you don't want to melt it. You can usually touch things up to about 120. An average person with construction work at hand. But the minute you can't touch it, it's time. Now that's ready. And I try to feather it in rather than bend it all at once. Put heat on it. Hold it. Let it set. Now you can see we have it. Let it cool normally, and then I'll just double check that I have it right. And of course this part of it can take a long time. This can be time consuming, but at the end of this I want to have all these that the pitch is identical. At least the pitch. The prop load won't be, but the pitch will be. And once that cools, that should be right on the money. Now once we get these the same, one of the things this allows us to do is, let's say somebody from California sends us a propeller and says, gee, I was trying this on my Jett 50 and no good, too wimpy, too strong, too weak, whatever. We have this gauge. We can have two choices. We can mail them the gauge, which even if they don't return it, the world didn't end. I can replicate the gauge real easily. Now, or I can just take one of my spare props that I know is pitched just about right and send them the prop. And usually, if you see how many props I have, the reason I have so many of them, I gotta shut this fan off if we're gonna balance props. What happens is, you really don't get them all back all the time. That's the bottom line. But it's worth it. There's a lot of people, needless to say, have sent me things that I enjoy sharing, so I'd rather have the friends. And I always, at the end of doing one of these, double check that it's not out of balance. And again, look at the very tip for any splits. If you see a carbon prop with a split in it, it is then a smaller diameter prop, because what's going to happen, that split can work its way, and I've seen this split work its way right down, and the prop will self-destruct in flight. So just check the edges. Make sure there's no little splits on there. And of course, the last thing, make sure it's in balance. It didn't, in the course of using it didn't pick up a chip or something. This one looks pretty good.
Extra special, thanks.
Now what I want to do as I finish these, I want to assign each one a unique number. I have numbers on some of them. I have 3, 4, I don't know what happened to some of them. I want to put, here's just an example, this is windy number 3. I like to mark them. Now, a couple of reasons. Then I have a relative number. At the field, I know 3 works better than 4. It's a lot easier to keep track of props by number. Number 2, with my name on them, you think there's 1 chance in a gazillion that I may get this back someday. Hey, President Nixon wants to borrow props. I guarantee that somebody wants to borrow props. Let me go see.
This is a whole afternoon of work. Each one now has a unique number. They all have the knurls that I really think are real important, especially with carbon props. I have all the diameters checked. They've all been balanced, and we're ready for another day of testing. Now, what it means is if I go out to the field, you're always going to want to eventually, at some point in time, have one prop a little up-pitched for hot days, one a little down-pitched for cool days. But a basic starting middle of the road is where we want to be. And you certainly, like buying shoes, the first thing you have to do is find a pair of shoes. If you take 10, find a set of 10. Then find out in every brand, Nikes or Adidas, sometimes they're 10 and a half or 11 or whatever. But having this gauge, this took us a whole afternoon of fooling around, but now we have a good gauge on getting our stuff right. By the next time we go to the field, I'll be able to really fine-tune it. Now, we ultimately wind up with the prop at the end of the year that works the best. I'll want to make a mold for that prop or send it to Bill Lee or Brian Ether or somebody to make a mold and replicate that prop. But all this development work, it takes a lot of time. And if you have one thing wrong on a plane, if you have pretend you had a Nobler and you had the only prop you had was a 10.8 or a 9.7 or a 9.3 or something, you'd be cursing the motor, the plane, everything. The prop is a very, very important thing to fine-tune, and in my case, this is part of the hobby that I enjoy, is getting these props really perfect. And when they're perfect, believe me, if you want to see an example of something that really is awesome, go look at Paul Walker's 1992 setup. I liked his 1992 setup. That year I had crashed, so I wasn't involved in a Walker fly-off, and I went to school. I listened to the motor. I have videotaped those flights and played that video 8,000 times listening to the motor run, and he really had it right on the razor edge. And even to this day, I go back and play that tape, and I'm awed by how well he had that motor running. It was really an impressive setup. I like to keep the props rubber banded with a piece of 1/8-inch wire. The reason for this is if you don't, they tend to bump into each other and chew up the leading edge, and then I take this setup and put this right into one of the sandwich bags, and that protects it from somebody dropping a screwdriver on it or whatever. It's just, once you put this much time and effort into a set of props, and this is going to be our Jett 50 set of props, so if somebody else comes along with a Jett 50, we can go right through this prop. And the worst of it is, I could send them this set of props and say, pick the one that works the best, and we'll replicate it for you. And that is a good way to store what amounts to be a whole afternoon of work to get that set up. Will it be worth it? Well, it'll be worth it if we can use it. But even better, if we can use it to help other people, then it really becomes where every minute of this afternoon becomes worthwhile. Now, the other part of our program that we need to get on track is I want to go back into the production of tuned pipes. Now, one of the things years ago, just for anybody that wasn't around back in the
late 80s or early 90s, Dave Midgley and I together worked on a program with the help of Ken Augustine. Ken Augustine was the head of Honda R&D for the motorcycle development program. And we took a lot of his information, used it to make these mandrels. Dave had these machined up professionally. We've made about, I got to clean these up. These are not in rough shape, but they're in need of a clean. We made two size pipes. We made one for the 40s, one for the 60s. Now, obviously, I'd like to make one of each, but I know, instinctively I know, that what's going to happen is the bigger of the two pipes is probably going to work better. And all these mandrels, this is the tooling that normally would go into making up your own set of tuned pipes. Now, we had a lot of options back in the 90s. We were trying to use the 60 pipe on the 40. If you go back to the 93 tweener videos, you'll see I was trying to run a 60 pipe on a 40. I had Frank Williams going crazy. He thought it ran so good, you know, and as we all did back then, we were just running around in circles. But having this set of mandrels now, what I'm going to do, Jack Young is going to send me a Brian Ether prop that he's purchased so I can measure it. And I basically want to come up with the mean average of what all the people, now I have Joe Adamusko, I have access to Joe's, the pipe that Billy Rowage is making, that seems to run real well. What we did years ago is rather than using flat baffles, we had conical, these are Teflon baffles, a high heat Teflon. And what this does, it creates a different wave. This was part of what we were doing with Ken Augustine's help. Well, we still have Ken Augustine's help if we need it, but, and especially with 9 cent a minute phone service, we're going to be calling him a lot. We have an awful lot of the pieces that Dave made, and what Dave did years ago, you can see what's happened. He tried vacuum bagging these, and he got the ridge, which we accept as a perfectly okay thing. This is one of the reject parts, but we're going to try, and we have the bag for the vacuum. We have, Jeff Stiefel has a vacuum pump that we can borrow, but I don't know that we're going to really need to do that. We have a bunch of this, for anybody who hasn't seen it. This comes from George Spar, and it's the sock that basically you pull over the mandrel to make the tuned pipes. Now, what he did with these mandrels, he has them Teflon coated, which is real nice. And the nice thing about Teflon coating the mandrels is you don't need a release agent. You just need to worry about PVA and around the edges. But these have made a lot of tuned pipes. And I appreciate that Dave has sent these down to me. There's quite a bit of time and energy involved in these. I don't really remember, back in 91, I think we sold a bunch of these pipes, but I don't even remember what we sold them for. So rather than get involved in that end of it, I want to get all the tooling together. I'm going to spend some time on the phone tonight with 2 other resin companies that make, and George is supposed to get me, George Aldrich has some resin, a company that makes resin in New York City that's supposed to be good to 3,000 degrees. I wonder what that costs, a pint or a quart or whatever. But obviously we want to try to keep this reasonable, that the pipes don't start costing $300 each to make. And having these mandrels, now we're in a really good position, having these mandrels that we can go out and we don't have to start all this machine shop work and all of this Teflon coating. All of that fits in one neat box. And I think we're going to, within the next maybe week or so, within the next couple of tapes, and maybe even make a dedicated tape for anybody that's never seen a tuned pipe being made. It's interesting stuff. Oh, and today's mail came this is kind of cool. We had Bob Martens, and Bob Martens, of course, did all the plans for the Spitfires and Seafires. This is the missile project that he's working on. He sent me a full-size poster. I have to get the curl out of it. I figure someplace I can hang this in the shop, or somewhere in Ken's shop, maybe. Can you imagine working on something like this now? What I would like about working on this is just knowing where these guys get all the resin and all the supplies and everything. Probably I wouldn't get much work done for the company. Thanks a lot to Bob. This is hard work. Look at this. How you doing? I wanted to try to set this up. This is the footage from the 92 Nats of Paul Walker's flight, and you can hear the motor run on this. Oh no! You can really hear
I have the sound turned way up. Listen to the sound of the motor.
You watch this kid.
You can see what a razor edge he had this running on.
That's right.
This is a good lesson in tune pipeology or whatever. This is one of my favorite flights, watching this over and over again.
He's got enough wind now. It's just about right.
I wish I could shut my voice out of this. Just listen to the motor here. George said he has some kind of a machine he can copy the RPMs off the TV screen. I'll be interested to see if he can do this. And this is just a copy. This is not for looking at purposes, but listen to the motor run. We could shut these people up talking. We want to hear the motor run. And this was near perfect stun heaven air this day.
What's he doing? Oh, yeah, show that on the video. Oh, how disrespectful.
Anyway, we had crashed, so of course we weren't really in a good mood. You can hear the engines picking up RPM at the top of the loops the way it should, not sagging at all. I remember this being just
Your shoe in, then he's going to win.
unbelievably good flight.
Formality flying out.
But it's the motor run that really had me crazy. The motor run that I really
Certainly, I don't think it's
did spend a lot of time trying to replicate it and never got there. But we got a second shot now with this Jett 50. Again, just listen to the motor more than anything else.
These bozo judges walking by here. Unbelievable.
You hear it picking up RPM right in the top of the loop, just like what you would expect any motor run that's set right to do. And believe me, this was not a real quiet motor run. This was probably the loudest of one of the loudest, but again, really razor edge on the money. Picking up RPM at the top, coming out of the maneuvers, and then giving that little burst of lean run like most of the pipe setups do. But I always thought this was the best one. And anyway, the way you learn a lot of times is just repeat the same thing over and over, so you can hear it in your mind. Nice and clean that goes lean right at the top. Now, I don't know how much of this has been lost in the transition footage and everything, but I can remember like it was yesterday. What a beautiful motor run. I love clean motor runs. A little bit leaner outside than inside. It's giving this right there, that burst of lean that you don't have on the insides. And possibly Paul had set it that way on purpose, but he wanted just a little extra burst of power there, or at the top of the vertical especially. And it seems a little leaner on outsides there. See, the beauty of video is you can go back, things you remember. Things that you remember, you don't really remember them accurately, but a video does a good job of, and in this case the motor run. I want to hear the top of the vertical hourglass here. Kicks in so nice, shuts off right there. Kicks in real nice, shuts off right there. Oh boy. Okay, he had this working. He has it working all the time, but I thought this time was exceptional. And this was a VF40. As it leaves the maneuver, you get that burst of RPM. Again, it's worth going back. It's worth having all these things on video. It's worth playing it over and over until you can see where the strong points and the weak points of some of these packages are. And being Paul has been the dominant flyer in the last, who knows how many years, 10, 15 years. It's good to try to see what he has as advantages and disadvantages, and try to get all the advantages try to at least play catch-up football if possible. But this motor run was something. Boy, I remember this. Unbelievable, and congratulations, of course, to Paul for a super win in '92.
It seems like sometimes you spend the whole afternoon and you don't really accomplish much, The bottom line is, all of this fine-tuning to get to that level, believe me, you don't just buy a prop off the shelf and boom, and it's done. A lot of this stuff is just a constant, at least I think it is, and I've found it to be that if I spend a lot of hours developing something, I know at the end of it, because I have the video of when it was new and I have the video of when it was developed. The Spitfire is a good example. First couple of days we flew the Spitfire, holy crow, you couldn't get anything dialed in. Well, years later, after 1,000 flights, we know exactly what prop and what pitch and what head gasket and what tank shim, and all of that stuff comes together when you go to the Nats or when you go to a real competitive contest and you're flying and you're trying to get it right on that razor edge. It's so important to know how to do that. There's so many people go to a contest with one prop. You get there and the plane's going too fast. Oh, I don't know what to do. Decompress it, different fuel, and then you start making it, you don't know what to do. If you try all these things in practice, when you get to a contest, you'll be way ahead of the game.